Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Suchitra Dalvie. I'm coordinator of the Asia Safe Abortion Partnership. So what we are hoping to do as part of this series of conversations is to try and unpack these very deep questions and bring for these conversations, bring along people who can offer a very unique perspective and can offer some insights into understanding what the issues are and where they are going to lead. And I would like to start with talking to Yu Yang first. If you are would like to share with us a little bit about what is happening in terms of the political and public conversation currently in China in regard to the whole sex ratio. Because in India, a lot of the conversation is now veering towards, these missing girls and therefore who will the boys marry. And I know that from China, we've heard studies which spoke of the bare branches where there are so many more men and so few women. And they think that that's going to cause some kind of a social conflict situation. So how does the conversation balance out with now the no longer having the one-child policy, but having the impact of the one-child policy in terms of sex ratio and any conversation around women's desire to choose to marry or not marry? Are young people talking about that? Are the politicians talking about it?
Okay, thank you. I want to share some data first. Actually, in 2018 and in my country, and roughly we have 104.6 males to 100 females. So basically, we can say China belongs to the countries with imbalanced sex ratio. So especially, I want to emphasize is in 2018, the sex ratio in the population aging among the 0 to 4, for the baby, is nearly 114 males to 100 females. So comes to this issue, actually, I have to address the disparity of the development in my country first. Actually, there is a huge gap between the developed parts and undeveloped parts. So actually, I grew up in the city, so I don't have much feeling about we have more boys than girls during my class. But they still have a lot of traditional preference for the male children in the countryside. Like Manisha talked about the poverty, the relationship between poverty and having more babies. It's what happens in China in undeveloped area. So for the farmers families, actually they still seek for the unlegal abortion the sex selective abortion. So there are some girls missing. This is for one reason. The other reason is, I think you guys already know, we have a policy called 户口. The registered book for each family. So some family, when they had girl, they will not register the girls in the local government. So there's another situation where girls missing from the data. They exist, but they're missing from the data. So this is one fact, and for the sex ratio. And for the marriage choices, I also want to share the data. It's we have in China, we have witnessed almost 7 years declining of the new registered, the registration for the marriage is almost 7 years. But there's main reasons our population, our birth rate is going down. But there's another reason is people are, especially for they are not like to get married. So the age for the age of marriage is also delayed. So there's interesting things in 1990s, our average married age for women is 21, and now it's 26. Now it's 26. Our legal age for get married for women is 20 in our law. So it's getting delaying. And actually, there also a huge gap between the developed part and undeveloped part. I mean, there is a province called Jiangsu province, which is maybe the richest province in China, and the average marriage age for girls is 34.2. Yeah, it's very interesting. So actually, more and more girls, they are not especially the educated girl, they are not willing to get married very young. But how to say it? But they're still facing a lot of. But the situation for them is not still very good. They will how to say it? For girls, they will facing more and more pressure than boys. Like I almost 30, and when girls come to my age, they will called leftover women. But for boys, we don't have this kind of pressure from the society. Right. And also unlike Japan and Korea, in China, well-educated women, they will go to the job market. So even China abolished the one-child policy in 2015, but the state didn't take account of the change in the welfare policies for them. So many girls, many women, they will refuse to take the offer to have child. So when they think about having child, it will cause some damage to their career. So they will refuse to get married when they are seeking their career. So but for the women who is educated, they at least have choice. Okay, I want to go to the job market. Okay, I don't want to get married. But as I mentioned before, for the women in the countryside, in the undeveloped parts, actually their educational and social resources for them were deprived. They don't have choice. They how do you say, they have little bargaining power when they comes to unwanted marriage. So if I want to share the situation of Chinese women in China, there are two absolute different words. For the women in the city, they have choice, but very tough choices. But for them who live in the countryside, they don't have choices. So it's still not very, how do you say, good situation for them.
Right. Wow, thanks a lot, Youyang. I think that was a very fascinating insight into something we don't often get to hear about. And I really loved the way you put it at the end. It's a reminder to us also that when we talk about our countries, even we ourselves, the generalizations often hide these kind of disaggregated differences among different constituencies. Like you said quite clearly, rural, urban. For us also, I think in all our countries, and I love the way you put it, that the urban women have more choices, but tough choices, whereas the rural women often don't even have those choices. There's a poverty of choices as well. And again, reflecting back on the same structures, marriage, financial capacities, what that leads to in terms of your own, how society looks upon you. That if you're a woman, then you're a leftover woman, because clearly as you grow older, your chance of then producing a child out of a marriage does go down. Whereas for the man, he can have a child even if he marries later. So the kind of
Yes.
value add that you have in a marriage market is also a reflection of your patriarchal, position.
Mm. Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much for that. That was really very interesting. Anandji, I wanted to come back to you and ask you what is the situation like in Nepal currently with the politics, the anti-choice politics, as well as the global gag rule implications, and how is that playing out in terms of the women's rights conversation? As Son told us, the rights-based conversation and the government policies don't always see eye to eye. So, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Nepal with that?
Yes, thank you. In Nepal, there is an organization registered as an NGO called Voice of Fetus. By its name, it's a pro-life, organizations. They wanted to come with a very big bang in Nepal in 2010, 2011 with demonstration, placards, and many things, and also hosting these hoarding boards in some of the vantage points in the city in Kathmandu. But with the NGOs, those who are right-based organizations, who work closely with the government, they were being compelled to remove all those hoarding boards from the city landscape. Now, the Voice of Fetus is not that vibrant in the city area, in the Kathmandu, in the capital, but they're still working in the remote rural districts, and even now they are quite active in the far western part of Nepal, where they use communication mechanism through demonstrations of this model of a small baby, and also they provide also a sort of invited talk programs at the churches and also at the school. As such, they are not able to influence the abortion rights for Nepalese women in the country. But the biggest anti-choice group is the Donald Trump himself, as he had reimposed this global gag rule, and when he came to the power in January 2017. So the global gag rule, which is called the Protecting Life for International Family Plan, International Health, global health initiatives. So it's basically, it blocks the U.S. global health, funds to any foreign NGOs. It doesn't affect the now. It has also begun to affect the domestic U.S.-based NGOs, but globally it doesn't. It normally affect only the foreign NGOs who are performing abortions, or they are providing counseling and referral on abortions, or they also tend to litigate about the abortion reforms in the country. Earlier, it was the restrictions were limited only with the organization working on family planning programs and abortion, but now the tentacles have expanded to organizations who are receiving the global, funds for HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, other things, So in March 2009, this particular program was further, made it more, stricter by the present Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo. And accordingly, he had announced that it will apply to even a sub-grantee. For example, the prime recipient of the US fund or the global fund is affected, if they complies with the global gag rule. But if the sub-grantees in a third country are not directly receiving any US government fund, but are getting some fund from the prime grantees, they are also being affected. So as a result, in a country like Nepal, where we are highly dependent on donors' funds and global funds, the difficulty that it has brought was that it has reduced the sources of fund for those non-compliant organizations who are working directly, indirectly on family planning and safe abortion services. For example, two of the largest organizations who have been affected by this GGR is the Family Planning Association of Nepal and also the Mary Stopes International. PSI is also now being affected because of this Pompoy's new policy about as a prime or as a subprime organization receiving the global aid fund. The three basic how it has impacted to countries like Nepal or any country in developing countries like Africa is that first thing is it constricts the funding sources. It constricts your relationship with other partner organizations. Like for example, in Nepal, there are a network of right-based organizations, but if one of them is a compliant organization receiving the US fund or from the Global Health Fund, these organizations have to, stop mingling with them, attending the programs if those are meant for family planning or abortion-related issues. And it has also created some sort of a, some sort of a, chilling effect among the government. Now the government doesn't realize, they know that such type of policy doesn't affect the government, but it has a chill in the sense that there are people who will be telling the government not to include safe abortion policies or the programs or the funding into their reproductive health programs. Now unfortunately or fortunately, earlier we have a safe abortion, CAC program, but now it has been integrated with safe motherhood and reproductive health and rights program. So if any US or the prime recipient of a global fund is trying to support the government under the Safe Motherhood and Reproductive Health Act or this initiative, they have to now clearly eliminate those organizations who are directly or indirectly working on safe abortion services, advocacy, and other types of directly, indirectly on these issues. Now, this is another dimension of the impact of the global Gag Rule that has been introduced by Pompey. And the other impact is those organizations like FPN and Mary Stopes. For example, FPN is a strongly non-compliant organization who have not been receiving any fund directly from the US government on family planning because they work on abortion. Now, they have their clinics in many districts, and they have a linkages, coordination linkages, referral linkages with other organizations or grassroots organizations. But because the grassroots organization or organization, their partners are now have become a compliant organization because they are getting the fund from the global fund, they are being denied, they have been stopped, and they have been strongly monitored and asked not to refer any abortion client to family planning clinics. Can you imagine in a remote districts of Nepal where the government service facilities are not able to provide medical abortion service because of many of the reasons, because they have a transferable positions of the government and the medical abortion service in the government health post is stopped. It is the family plannings and the Mary Stopes clinics they have been providing. So they have been complementing and supplementing the work of the government in expanding safe abortion services in the country. But if the clinics are not receiving any clients because those women who come to a compliant clinics seek for abortion and they are being not referred to the clinic, so they are losing their clients. So as a result, many of the staff and the clinics of Mary Stopes and also for Family Planning Association of Nepal have been forced to close down their clinics. So they had a very big funding support from the USA worth of $10 million shared between Mary Stopes and FPN, and that was basically to support government's family planning programs, including the long-acting reversible method like LARC programs like implant and IUCD. Now, this project was been forced to close down before the completion of the project term, just because they received this funding at the time of your Obama administration, and when now this Donald Trump have become the president, they have to withdraw from this particular complaint. They decided not to comply with the policies of the global gag rule. So these are some of the facts. And my organization, CREHPA, we are the first organization in early 1999, 2000, where we have rejected the global gag rule policy that was introduced by the Bush administration. So we were denied of at the time, 85,000 US dollars of money for the research. Now it's also affecting. So the chilling effect is also coming to the research organization, because since you are working on abortion-related research, you will certainly recommend for advocacy or for expansion of the services. So they will have their own reservation in providing. But we know that we are doing advocacy, we are doing a lot of research on abortion. Today, our sources of funding are being again constricted because we cannot apply for a very large scale research funding. And at least once or twice a year, there are the prime grantees or potential grantees who will write to us, directly to CREHPA, to become a part of their sub-grantees and bid for the project. We have to tell them, no, if it is USAID money, we cannot be your partner or bid for this project. So these are, well, we don't consider this as a big issue, but for the NGOs who are dependent upon the global money, and where the US government has a higher stake even in the global fund. I think they contribute 33% of the total fund. So and how the US is also having the largest contributor of the family planning funding in the developing countries like Africa. Now, if they have a restrictions and all these gagging type of policies, is certainly going to affect organizations in those developing countries. For example, in Nepal, the organizations who work on family planning are also providing supportive role as a in promoting abortion services or referring. Now, if the fund is denied for the family planning because you are working abortion, now what will be the fate of these organizations? So the biggest anti-choice group is the US government policy. Absolutely. And we are not scared of the voice of the fetus, but the US government anti-choice policy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for unpacking that absolutely devastating impact that the gag rule is having. And along with the gag rule, I think there are many other sort of private foundations which may not be actually, anti work on abortion. But even, for example, the big programs like, say, FP 2020, they talk only about contraception and never address failed contraception resulting in unwanted pregnancies needing an abortion. That also has a chilling effect on what you think you can or cannot talk about, particularly in the context of abortion where there's already so much stigma. This kind of adds more and more layers of stigma and silence. And today, as we are talking about the US policies and Trump, I must also say that it's a very sad day for women's rights work in the US with the passing away of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who has been at the forefront of conversations for women's rights and autonomy, and really fought almost to the end of her days to try and see whether she could survive this Trump administration and hope for a new future. So our deepest condolences with our sisters in the US who are fighting the battle within their country as well. But taking on from what you just said, Anand, and this reflection, and as you said quite rightly, in Asia there are many countries which are still dependent on, say, even something like condom supplies, because many of the smaller countries don't produce their own manufacturing, and they are dependent on supplies from the USAID. So it's a very difficult choice to make. Do you deny the condom access because you want to stand for safe abortion rights, or do you allow yourself to be gagged on safe abortion rights because you must provide condom supplies to your communities? It's a very, very, again, seeing all those frameworks of oppression coming into play, and the hegemony that some of the countries and some of the funds have on the kind of work we are able to do. And I know that She Decides was a group that was set up as a response to the gag rule. But unfortunately, I think they don't have as large a corpus, to make up for the losses caused by the gag rule. So, sort of to close this conversation, very fascinating insights and unpacking of these conversations, I wanted to ask Manisha, because you, as I said, you've also been part of the very first movement against sex determination in India. And we know now with population policies and two-child family norm again being a conversation, and coercion for sterilization, which has always been a part of a lot of our government programs. What do you see in terms of the political trajectory of everything that we've been discussing so far? Where do you think we are headed? And what can we as advocates do to try and, veer things in a direction which is more in terms of social justice issues, universal access to safe abortion and women's rights conversations that we are all struggling for? So I'm sorry, I'm leaving you with a very complicated question at the end, but it would be nice to, again, have sort of the big picture tying up of the loose ends of what we've been discussing so far.
I think, again, I would tie this to much broader, issues and modern concepts such as equality, social justice, democracy. So in an unequal society, what you do is you just do away with the people. Yeah, so as you have son wantedness, you also have daughter unwantedness, because not only is that you want a son, but a daughter being born brings issues of honor and shame upon the family because of the whole restrictions on the sexuality that is governed through patriarchy. So even if you have 5 sons, it's better still not to have a 6th daughter, because that really brought down your social status versus a kinship or versus a clan. And I think that reinstating those notions of equality really are very important. So in an unequal society, when you have equality coming in, then you have backlash violence. So then what do you do with all these women who are single, women who are lesbians, women who, stand on their own feet? You have backlash violence, a daughter who wants to marry outside the caste or outside the religion. Then you have backlash violence. So I would say that, really promoting equality becomes the major issue, because technology did not create inequality. Therefore, technology is not going to get rid of inequality. If you see the whole COVID pandemic, it's not COVID that brought inequality. COVID just showed us the grotesque image of what society is. And like all, whether human-made or natural disasters, you find that those who are disenfranchised get further disenfranchised. The poor become completely destitute. Those who are not poor go below poverty line. So this is what happens with any kind of disaster. And so therefore our campaign that was against, the sex determination test, we knew the limitations. We knew that this technology is not going to resolve the issues. The issue was just about bringing notice to say that in pre-colonial times, when you had infanticide, you got rid of daughters in that particular way. Then you find that during British times, where there was not much different law between boys and girls, so therefore infanticide had to stop. Even if you were like a feudal lord, you still were answerable if you killed your daughter. But then in the 70s and 80s, you find a technology that now actually makes your son wantedness possible. And therefore, how this gets linked to abortion is because the structures adapt themselves when agency happens. And so today what happens is that the rights are pitted against each other. So whose rights are we talking about here? So the state is not being answerable to its obligation to see that women are equal in society. There we have laws, we have wonderful laws, we have the law against dowry, we have the law against bigamy, we have all these laws. But those are not being practiced. But now the rights, in quotes, the rights of the female fetus that the state now wants to protect are pitted against the right of the woman who goes to have the abortion. Yeah. So therefore, you create rights for something that is abstract versus the rights of somebody who always exists. Now, again, who are the witch-hunted women? The women who are already disenfranchised. So the woman here who is witch-hunted is the one who has the female fetus. And she's the one who lands up in the abortion clinic. But the one who has the male fetus and therefore, follows the rules of patriarchy to create the male heir in her married household, so that the property can be passed from one generation to another, is not the one who gets trapped. And therefore, I think we need to understand that these structures that are there for 3,000, 4,000, 1,000 years are not going to be eradicated just with one generation. So our campaign never at all targeted abortion, but the new vigilante, you know, and when you in a small feminist group where your discussions are extremely intense, you know, nuanced differences. But when the fallout of a campaign becoming mass based, and campaigns must become mass based, we do want mainstreaming, right? But when that happens, the nuanced approach of what you're talking about, actually discrimination, then becomes a discourse around violence. And the violence then is against the fetus. And the moment you say violence against the fetus, you use terms like feticide, which you know are reminiscent of suicide, homicide. And so therefore then it becomes the issue of the woman who bears that female fetus being the murderer of the fetus. And then therefore then the whole discussion becomes anti-abortion. Now we have to realize that there will be newer technologies. Yeah, so one of the things that happened as a consequence of our campaign in India was that amniocentesis and chorionic villi biopsy that got conducted in the first 2 months of pregnancy, then shifted to ultrasonography, because that doesn't leave any footprints, it doesn't leave any fingerprints. You can say one thing inside the clinic, you can say one thing, and you can keep changing you know, the oral conversations of whether it's a male fetus or a female fetus. And so therefore now that, because it shifted to ultrasonography, which can only happen in the 4th or 5th month of pregnancy when the testicles descend, now comes in conflict with the MTP law. The MTP Act, that's the Medical Termination of Pregnancies Act in India, passed in 1971, enacted 72. So that's how it comes in conflict. And again, therefore, then it becomes, it kind of fuses with abortion, because now second trimester abortion, the woman must have had a sex determination, especially if she's had a daughter, if she has a living daughter. And so therefore technologies will change. Soon we'll be able to find out through blood, we'll be able to find out through saliva. The rich will be able to go abroad. You know, I have 2 granddaughters, and we knew that we were going to have granddaughters in the 4th or 5th month of our, you know, our son and daughter-in-law, their pregnancy. But that didn't have any discriminatory consequences, and therefore when you reach a level where there won't be any discriminatory consequences, really it doesn't matter whether you find out the sex of the fetus or you don't find out the sex of the fetus. I would further go and say, why do you even need a law regulating abortion? As you very rightly said, that the medical termination of pregnancies is doctor-centered and is fetus-centered. Now, when are we going to center it around the person who is pregnant, a woman or a trans man? Because it's on their bodies that this entire patriarchal war is being played out. It's that body that is being policed by the family to have sons, by the state not to have more than 2 children, and then by patriarchy, where you have to bear that male fetus, and not just the male fetus, but within a patriarchal heteronormative marriage. And I think as we question all these different issues and are able to accept equality as a modern concept that has come to stay, we are always going to find ways of those who are unequal further disenfranchised, and then when those who are disenfranchised ask for equality, then to come with a backlash. And so I would think that, you know, in say in a country like Canada, where there isn't any act that governs abortion. So why should you even have an act related to abortion? So I think, you know, we have to move to the right to abortion, no questions asked. And women, I mean, we know it's not such an easy choice that, you know, instead of, you know, doing something else today afternoon, I'll go and have an abortion.
Yeah.
Therefore, respect the person when that person comes into the clinic. That person, according to Article 1 of the UDHR, you know, has conscience, has reasoning, is born equal in rights and dignity. And so therefore, don't allow any other patriarchal or state norms to govern what happens to this person when that person enters the clinic. And I would fully agree with what, you know, Son and, you know, everybody else has said. You said, so suppose it's a solution to an unwanted pregnancy, well, so what?
Yeah.
Isn't that nice that you have a solution? But here the whole solution and the acts that govern abortion are actually because the question is, whom does the fetus belong to? And unless we are able to unpack that, and unless we are able to take away the ownership of patriarchy and the husband over that fetus, because that's the one thing that the male cannot do in patriarchy, and that is to actually produce the child. And so therefore, as long as that dichotomy exists, we are always going to have the issue around contraception and around abortion. I would also like to reflect upon what Anand said. Look at what the international funding is doing to civil society organizations, and in Nepal. I mean, imagine, they haven't had the history of colonization like many countries, other countries have had. But how you pit one organization against another organization, and how you create an untouchability, and how you create stigma with one associating with another, and how I won't come with you until this part, we won't take you because you are under, so I think, this kind of the politics that, the global north that actually made its resources upon the bodies of people from the global south. I think it's time that we question why they should, govern us, and, why. I hope there'll be a day when we say, we don't want any funding from the global north, and I hope that day comes. Very soon.
Thank you so much, Manisha. Those were really amazing, overarching remarks. And I think the main takeaway from this is, although we spoke about, in the context of population policies, sex ratio, and abortion rights, these are all embedded in a far larger intersectional framework, socio-cultural, political, economic, which we don't often talk about, but the larger economic framework, whether it's neoliberalism or, the post-colonial development funding, kind of gives us the sense that these are all very big social justice and human rights issues, and we should not look at them in isolation. We must keep holding our governments accountable as duty bearers to make sure that whatever policies they come up with are a reflection of protecting, fulfilling the human rights of their citizens. And hopefully, in the post-COVID world, and as you said quite rightly, Manisha, COVID has just magnified the gaps and made clearer what many of us have always been saying in terms of inequalities, whether they are of power or of resources. So hopefully going forward, all of us as activists and advocates will use these learnings and lessons and opportunities to work towards a more just and a more equitable world. So I would like to close this conversation by thanking all of you very much for your engagement, for your time, and for your wonderful insights and unique reflections. So thank you very much, all of you, and we look forward to many such conversations in the future.